could you graphically represent the history of media with a kind of line that peaks upward at points of maximum change and goes down again? I guess you really could. You'd probably do one in, if you're just speaking in the Greek and Roman world, you'd do one in the 8th century when the Greeks learned to write, because that's a huge one. You would do one in the Hellenistic world when they really learned to build big libraries and to store lots of books and to try to settle their texts down. You'd do one when the codex comes in and replaces the scroll. And then the next really huge one would be print in the revolution of the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, when European society rapidly becomes a lot more literate than it had ever been. Books begin to be produced in bigger numbers, and then there's a hop to print, and print then transforms things far beyond what anyone had imagined possible, even with professional scribes producing books pretty quickly. If we were looking for the parallel in the print revolution to where we are now, I'd look for the late 15th century, where nobody really knows what's going to happen when you put something out there. Some devices are put out that turn out to be incredibly successful, like the pocket-sized book. Other devices are put out there that turn out to be gradually quite unsuccessful, like the book that's printed like a manuscript with space left for lots of coloring and individualizing, which works for a while but gradually fades out in favor of a kind of black and white print sensibility. And the huge problem of early print, and it's the one that reminds me of now, was venture capitalists and burning through money. The difference between manuscript and print is that you usually make manuscripts for customers. So you have an order, you can take a deposit, you get your money back right away. As soon as you go to print, you've got to buy the equipment, the type, the ink, the paper, which is the biggest single expense. You've got to hire a staff, you've got to print the damn things, and you don't get a cent back until you've done the whole job, which means that printers are constantly going bankrupt, having, as Gutenberg did, huge fights with their partners. And it's a huge compulsion. Now, eventually they learn to make alliances, do exchanges, work with other publishers so that their stock of books to sell can be more varied. But in the 15th century, there's a famous case in Rome where the great printers Sveinheim and Ponartz, German printers, come to Subiaco, an abbey outside Rome, and then to Rome, start printing these beautiful editions of Greek and Latin texts, which are much cheaper than the manuscripts. They cost about a third what the manuscripts did. People are very excited. We can document this. And within 4 years, they're completely broke because they've produced so many classical texts that the market is absolutely saturated. And they write to the Pope and say, our house is full of paper and empty of food. And I've just seen this play out so many times in the web, in the dot bomb and after, that it just reminds me of that moment. And this becomes much less common in the 16th century, when the capacities of print, the needs of a print atelier, all of those things are better understood. Well, the market for print is a very difficult thing to fix. Your question is, are you selling to a local market? Well, any local market in the cities of 5,000 and 10,000 with a few hundred students and scholars will necessarily be quite limited. So very soon after print makes its move, after the presses move up the rivers and establish themselves in every city in Europe, the printers are making strategic alliances, they're working together, they learn how to ship books, they learn how to make contracts to share investments in expensive books. And I think the sophistication, the rapid sophistication of this market is one of the fascinating things about the whole enterprise. And the extraordinary degree of cooperation that often takes place between printers you might expect to be rivals, who actually work together to more or less cartelize and carve up a market rather than to compete madly. Then there are other cases where you do get the mad competition. No, print, it's a wild profession, printing. It started late as a medieval craft, and it never quite regulated itself. They never had that sense, I think, of God looking at the back of the triptych that the painters did. And there's a marvelous autobiography of a 16th century printer, Thomas Platter, who was a Swiss. He printed Calvin's Institutes, so he was quite an important printer. And twice a year there would be a book fair, and of course in Frankfurt the book fair would be the place for which you wanted your edition to be ready, because that's where you could lay off copies in dozens with other printers. So the pressure got to be enormous in the weeks leading up to the book fair. And Platter tells this wonderful story about how he's late at night, they're feeding the workers and keeping them at the presses practically 24/7. Late at night he's correcting proofs as fast as he can, and suddenly he realizes that his partner is coming up behind him with a plank about to try to lay him out. So he lays out the partner with a punch, and then the workers are very angry to see their bosses fighting. It's all terrible, but it was a rough profession. It could always be a rough profession. I still like the 15th century moment because it's not just books. There's the vast range of woodcut and then other forms of prints which also come into existence at the same time. There's pamphlets, there's leaflets, the leaflet newspaper, or Zeitung. There's just so much going on. And many of the people who are involved in one are involved in the other. If you're a printer and you're printing big books, there's going to be a moment when one of your presses is out of action because you have 3 presses doing a big book and you don't have anything happening in the 4th, so you print little booklets, or you print news sheets talking about the fall of Constantinople. And so this kind of multiplication of media that are all related and all in some way or other on the same platform strikes me again as something I recognize.